This is the fastest ITX GPU that you can find on the market today. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking that I'm holding an RTX 3060 from P&Y in my hands. You are in fact wrong. I'm actually holding an RTX A4000 in my hand instead of a 3060. What is up, everyone? My name is Ken, also known as Wiltshire. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I will be unveiling the Power Shunt mod for the A4000 that was co-developed between JK&G Ventures and myself. And I cannot wait to show you guys how much power you can squeeze out of this A4000 compared to the stock A4000. So there have been a lot of changes to this A4000. This A4000 is now very heavily modified, and I'm going to get into a breakdown on what those changes are for this A4000 and how we got to the 3070 Ti levels of performance. The very first thing is obviously the replacement of the stock resistor shunts on the graphics card itself. The shunts that are replaced on this graphics card are here and here. So this one is for the 8-pin power cable for the PCI-E power, and we'll get into that. That's another mod that was done to this card, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But the other one is also down here by the PCI-E X16 slot on the graphics card. So a stock A4000, due to the fact that it has a 6-pin power cable, and I'm just going to grab the stock heatsink for the A4000 here, it had a 6-pin on the end right here. And that limited the card to only draw about 140 watts on the graphics card. And obviously, we can only overclock a little bit until we hit that power wall of 140 watts. The graphics card will just crash if you try to overclock it any more than, I'd say, probably about 150 megahertz to 200 megahertz, depending on the quality of silicon that you got on your A4000. With this mod, that ups the ante big time. And I can say that the maximum power draw that I saw on this card was about 195.5 watts for the power draw instead of 140. So we increased the power draw by approximately 40%, which is insane. So the next mod that will be included with this modding package is the 8-pin power cable mod that was developed by myself. If you haven't seen my previous video, I decided to solder an 8-pin power cable onto my A4000 to see if all of these traces on the back side of the card here were still connected to the GPU. And to my surprise, they actually are in fact still connected, which means we can attach an 8-pin power cable to the PCB of the A4000, as you can see here, and it fits perfectly. It's like it was designed for it. Not much mods were done to this RTX 3060 cooler in order to make this fit. So pretty crazy that that actually worked. The only problem was I was unable to get it to draw more power, and that's where the shunt mod comes into play. So in combination together with JK&G Ventures shunt mod and my 8-pin mod that I came up with, we are able to push this card even more than we normally would have been able to. The second last thing that will be included in this mod package that you can find on JK&G Ventures website will be the mounting brackets that were developed for this heatsink and this card. So there were 90-degree angle brackets that were developed to get more clamping pressure or mounting pressure on the GPU die and the VRMs to allow better cooling for the A4000. I don't know if you knew this, but with the stock heatsink that's over here, this guy here, the graphics card would run at like 85 degrees Celsius, and it's super loud because it's a blower style cooler. With this guy here, I'm seeing maximum temperatures of 75 degrees Celsius, well overclocked, and 90% fan speed. So that's a huge improvement due to these brackets. And another bracket that was placed on this card is right here. This guy right here is another bracket that was attached to the heatsink to allow better mounting pressure. So there's two 90-degree angle mounting brackets that allow better mounting pressure. Now the final thing that will be included in this modding package will be the heatsink itself. This heatsink is completely optional. You can select not to buy it on the website if you want to get this A4000 mod. So say, for example, if you have an A4000 water block that you want to attach to this power mod, as well as the 8-pin mod that JK&G Ventures is offering, then you can do that. You can just select, I don't want the cooler, and it will be much cheaper. And that leads me into the price of this mod. The mod price without the cooler is $125 US. With the heatsink included, it is $150 US on JK&G Ventures website. With that said, they have offered me a coupon code to give to my viewers, which was super nice from John from JK&G Ventures. The first 200 people that use the coupon code Wiltshire, which is WILTSHIRE in all caps, using the link in the description below to buy the A4000 Power Mod will get 15% off. That's only the first 200 people, mind you. So make sure you act quick if you want this mod after you see all of my benchmarks and my testing results. If you're still interested, I recommend acting on it quickly because only the first 200 people will get that 15% off with the coupon code Wiltshire. Again, that's Wiltshire, WILTSHIRE. And a little disclaimer I want to give to you guys, I am not seeing any financial compensation whatsoever for this coupon code. It was just something nice that John from JK&G Ventures was offering to my viewers because I helped develop this thing basically. I've got a ton of benchmarking results to show you guys to see if we can get to the claimed 14% increase on the stock clocks, as well as up to 36% performance increase on the overclocks for this card, bringing it up to 3070 Ti performance. Is it true? Well, let's find out. I also wanted to note that I am using an OptiFlex 7070 in today's video, and this is a heavily modified one that I call OptiFlex. And OptiFlex is sporting an i9 9900. And another thing that is a limitation about OptiFlex is its RAM. It's locked at 266600 megahertz. This motherboard is PCI-E 3.0 instead of 4.0. This motherboard does not support resizable bar or rebar, which apparently helps the scores out a lot on this graphics card, as confirmed by John himself from JK&G Ventures. So with that said, let's get into our first synthetic benchmark, which is FireStrike. So with FireStrike, I got a stock graphics score of 27,609. And the first thing that we'll be looking at is going to be the A4000 stock unmodded but overclocked scores versus the A4000 modded stock clock scores. Stock unmodded overclocked A4000 got a graphics score of 30,039 versus the A4000 modded with its stock clocks got 30,696. So that is quite the jump from the stock performance of the graphics card, which is about 11.18% of an increase over the stock graphics card. John's claim of 14% compared to the stock version of the graphics card is actually very, very accurate. And I would say that the limitations that I mentioned earlier for OptiFlex is definitely affecting its ability to get to that 14%. So I'm going to say that's confirmed for at least FireStrike. With the modded overclock version of the A4000, we got 33,033. I later was able to score a little bit higher than that at 33,066, but we'll be using the 33,333 score as it was my best overall score for the FireStrike run. And that was an increase of 19.64% over the stock clocks, which is pretty good. So looking at the Port Royal scores, we got a stock graphics score of 6,609. And again, we'll be looking at the stock unmodded but overclocked scores versus the modded A4000 with its stock clocks. So the stock unmodded but overclocked A4000 got 7,501, and the modded A4000 running at its stock clocks got 7,835, which is an 18.5% increase over the stock clocks of the A4000, which is a crazy increase to see. So if we move on to the overclocked results versus the stock clocked, but again, these are modded. The modded got 7,835, and the overclocked version got 8,522, which is a 29% increase of performance, which that is a crazy result to see. A 29% increase in performance by just a shunt mod and an 8-pin power mod is pretty crazy. So moving on to Speedway, we got a stock graphics score of 2,833. Again, the stock unmodded but overclocked score was 3,103, and the RTX A4000 modded stock clock score was 3,212. And if we look at that, that is a 13.4% increase in performance over the stock clocks of the A4000 on the Speedway benchmark, which is in line with John's 14% increase claims on his website. So again, thumbs up from me. Everything is looking great so far for the performances of the stock clocks. If we move on to the overclock score versus the stock clocks on the modded version of the A4000, so 3212 versus 3550, that is a 25.3% increase on performance for the A4000 when overclocked. And again, I have all of the specifications that I used in MSI Afterburner. So this was plus 270 megahertz on the core clock and 1000 on the memory clock. I have them all listed above there so you can check them out as well. I forgot to mention that earlier. So moving on to our final benchmark, and this is always going to be the most popular one, is TimeSpy. So the stock graphics score for TimeSpy was 11,721. With the stock unmodded yet overclocked version of the A4000, we saw a graphics score of 12,096 versus the modded yet stock clock version of the A4000 got 12,716. Now this is only an 8.5% increase on the performance versus the stock clocks, which is still a relatively good performance gain. But again, I'm going to chalk that up to not being as close as the 14% claims from John. And I'm going to blame it on OptiFlex on this one, I think. Because TimeSpy is pretty intense on your hardware, and I think I could get a much better score on the graphics card if I had a better system. So if we compare the modded A4000 stock clocks versus the overclocked version of the A4000, we get the following results. So again, the stock clocks modded A4000 got 12,716 compared to the overclocked version of the A4000, which used a core clock of plus 267 on the core clock, and we got plus 988 on the memory clock, and that resulted in a score of 13,692, which is approximately a 17% increase in performance over the stock clocks on the A4000. So that is a very good result in my opinion. And again, I'm going to blame the lack of performance gains on OptiFlex. And the reason why that is because John actually got a much higher score on his setup compared to what I did with OptiFlex. So I got a score of 13,692 for my graphics score. John got 14,123 on his graphics score compared to me. And that was with his setup. Before moving on to the gaming benchmarks, I just wanted to do a quick comparison between the best 3070 Ti stock graphics scores that I found on the 3D Mark leaderboards versus our modified A4000. So starting with TimeSpy, the best stock score for the 3070 Ti that I found was 12,781 versus my run of 13,692 with the modified A4000, which I saw an increase of performance of 7.13% versus John's best score, which was much better than mine at 14,123, which is a 10.5% increase over the stock 3070 Ti, which is insane to see. I was so happy to see those results. So moving on to Speedway. Speedway's best 3070 Ti stock score was 3,140 versus my score of 3,550, which is a 13.06% increase over the stock 3070 Ti. Again, crazy to see. That's awesome. Moving on to Port Royal. Port Royal's best 3070 Ti stock score was 7,393, and mine was 8,522, which was a 15.3% increase over the stock 3070 Ti score. And last but not least is FireStrike. Now, FireStrike was a little different for the modified A4000. The best stock score for the 3070 Ti that I found was 33,050 versus my first run, which was 33,033, which was a 0.05% decrease in performance compared to the 3070 Ti at its stock clocks. And I managed to tweak things a little bit more and squeeze a little bit more out of the A4000 on another run for FireStrike. And that resulted in a score of 33,066, which is a 0.048% increase over the stock 3070 Ti, which is absolutely crazy to see. So with those results out of the way, we are going to get into the gaming benchmarks. That's probably where a lot more people are interested in compared to the synthetic benchmarks. So let's get into the gaming benchmarks. The games that I used for the gaming benchmarks were only 4 games. I unfortunately didn't have a whole lot of time to test the A4000. I had to get it shipped off to John, so I was in a bit of a rush. But those games are Apex Legends Season 16, the new Deadspace remake, Doom 2016, and Sonic Frontiers with a frame rate unlock mod attached to Sonic Frontiers. So, starting with Apex Legends Season 16, running at 1440p low with medium model details, we saw not much of an increase on the results for Apex Legends. The thing that is the standout is the minimum FPS, but we'll go through all of the results. So the max FPS was 145. The game is locked to 145 on the game engine itself. The average FPS was 144, again unchanged between the two. The minimum FPS is where we see the major change for Apex Legends with the new mod, and that was 121 versus 132. For the modded version of the A4000. The 1% low was the same at 95, and the 0.1% low was ever so slightly worse, which is probably within the margin of error between the two cards at 79 versus 77 for the modded version of the A4000. So moving on to the Deadspace remake, which was running at 1440p, high preset, DirectX 12, blur off, DLSS was enabled on balance, the motion blur was off, and grain was on. And Deadspace saw quite a big difference in performance compared to the stock version of the A4000 and the modified version of the A4000. So the maximum FPS was 154 versus 167 in favor of the mod. The average FPS was 126 versus 129, again in favor of the mod. The minimum FPS was 102 versus 107 in favor of the mod. The 1% low was 79 versus 84, and again in favor of the mod. And 0.1% low was 46 versus 52. So overall, the modified A4000 saw a better performance compared to the stock A4000. And again, I have all of my overclocking settings listed on these graphs, so you can feel free to try those out for yourself if you get a modified A4000. These are all the stock, or rather the overclock settings that I tried and where I can get the game to be stable and not crash. So moving on to the next two games, which was Sonic Frontiers and Doom 2016. So both games were running at 1440p. We're going to start with Sonic Frontiers. That was running on 1440p high with an uncapped frame rate mod. The biggest performance difference I saw was for Sonic Frontiers, ironically enough. And I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it just utilized the hardware better, or it used a different API than the games that I tried earlier. Maybe it was a DirectX 11 title. I'm not entirely sure. So the maximum FPS on the stock version of the A4000 was 179 versus the modded 207. The average FPS was 150 versus 180 in favor of the A4000, which is a crazy increase of 30 FPS. The minimum FPS was 112 versus 140. The 1% low was 108 versus 133. The 0.1% low was 103 versus 121. And those settings on MSI Afterburner were plus 240 megahertz on the core clock and plus 1000 megahertz on the memory clock. So for Sonic Frontiers ran beautifully. The insane increase I got on Sonic was very noticeable. And as you can see from that graph, that's insane. So I was very happy to see that Sonic Frontiers saw such a performance gain with the Power Mod and the 8-pin mod for the A4000. So moving on to our final game, which was The Witcher 3, which was the next gen update of The Witcher 3. So this is running at 1440p using the RT preset, DirectX 12. Blur was off, DLSS was on performance, Sharpen was off, and Hairworks was also off. So we saw a comparison of 74 to 80, an average FPS of 67 to 73, minimum FPS of 62 to 69, a 1% low of 49 versus 53, and a 0.1% low of 35 versus 46. So we didn't see an entire huge upgrade on performance for The Witcher 3, but it's a performance gain nonetheless, and I'm extremely happy with the gains from all of these games. So after doing a bit of math, I managed to calculate the performance increases using all four of those gaming benchmarks together. So the overall gaming performance increase that we saw, that's taking everything in account together, such as max, average, min, the 1% low and the 0.1% low combined together for all of those games. We saw a 10.16% increase on overall gaming performance, which is great to see. The overall max FPS increase percentage that we saw was 8.52%. The overall average FPS increase was 8.01% increase. We also saw a 12.85% increase on the minimum FPS. The 1% low saw a 10.94% increase, and the 0.1% low saw a 12.55% increase on gaming performance, which just means overall the games ran much smoother, and I was very happy to get these results. Not as high as I was expecting, to be honest, but again, I'm going to chalk that up to me using this on a Dell OptiFlex. It's got a lot of limitations. If you're able to use this on, say, a 5900X or a 5800X 3D, something like that with rebar-enabled PCI-E 4.0 compatible motherboard, you'd probably see much higher results than I did here in today's video. But with that said, guys, that's going to wrap up today's video. What did you guys think of the A4000 Power Shunt Mod with the 8-pin power mod that I found myself? Would you guys do it? I personally would. I'm a tech enthusiast, and I always want to get the best performance out of everything that I can. So I'm always looking to try and squeeze a little bit more performance out of my hardware that I have on hand. But with that said, that's going to wrap up today's video. I want to thank John from JK&G Ventures for being such a great guy and helping me work through this issue and get this modded. And I hope you guys check it out on his website. The link will be in the description below. Again, make sure you use that coupon code that I mentioned earlier to get 15% off, which is only good for the first 200 people that use it. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.